Welcome into another series of our Outstanding Leaders of Dentistry, a project of the International College of Dentists. Today we're delighted to have with us Dr. Robert J. Collins, Jr. We know him as Skip, former public health chief of the dental service, former Indian health expert, and still is, and is now the interim director, executive director, of the American and International Association of Dental Research. Thank you, Skip. I know your schedule is very, very busy. I know a meeting's coming up, but we were delighted that you've taken time to do that. I also want to say that I've known you for many years and know that you're dedicated to providing information to people and providing the services to all the public health people, which we think is very important. As you know, this tape will be stored in the National Museum of Dentistry in Baltimore, the home of the first dental school. So now I got rid of all those things. Let Pascal get into the interview. We're trying to figure out who Skip Collins really is. Where were you born, Skip?
Born in Cambridge, Massachusetts in 1945.
And tell us about Mom and Dad.
Well, Dad's from New Hampshire, Mother's from Massachusetts. My father from a little city called Dover over near Portsmouth in New Hampshire. Went to a small liberal arts college, in fact the one that I and all of my siblings also attended, called St. Anselm's up in Manchester, or just outside of Manchester, New Hampshire. He met my mother during World War II, and I was born towards the end of World War II in 1945. In fact, World War II's was partly responsible for the nickname Skip, but we can get into that later, yes, if you like.
So you're a World War II victory baby.
Indeed.
Now, brothers and sisters.
I have two brothers and a sister. My sister is 6 years younger than I am. I'm the oldest of the four, and is a teacher up in New Hampshire. My brother is a government specialist, otherwise known as a lobbyist, who does a lot of work with the state legislature in New Hampshire and also with the some degree the federal government. My youngest brother's an emergency room physician, Brian, up in York, Maine. After a brief stint in the Air Force, got an internship and residency, and very happy to be settled back in New England. I'm really the only one that exhibited a fair amount of wanderlust and left home a long time ago, and really just get back for visits now, but still have a very fond place in my heart for New Hampshire and the rest of New England.
Were those days pretty good days for you, those little Skip Collins?
Yeah, they really were. I don't remember much about the time in the Boston area, because we moved out when I was about a year old. Much to my mother's chagrin, I'm told at the time she was a city gal. But Dad was from the country, and his job was up there. His early job was in radio. Did some radio and then a bit of TV when it came along, but mostly on the advertising side. So we moved to not a working farm, but a very large farm just about a mile down the road from St. Anselm's College. In fact, the college owned the property. It was given to them by the Daly family. And we had about 90 acres of field around the old farmhouse. And even though it was on a somewhat busy country road, I have a lot of fond memories of playing in that field and the woods beyond with the relatively few companions that there were in the area.
Now, early days, junior high, high school, Were there any individuals that we could call mentors like we do nowadays, but were there any of those people that you recall that were significant in giving you direction to keep your education going other than, say, mom and dad?
We have to be mom and dad principally. I can think of a sister, Adela, who was my first grade instructor at St. Raphael's School. And if I had to name one person, it was probably our pastor, Father Raymond Burns, who was a kind old gentleman. He was a Benedictine. The Benedictines were in charge of St. Anselm's College, where ultimately I went to college. But they also staffed what originally was parish-serving German immigrants in that area of Manchester. And there were, at most of the time, at least 3 priests that were extant in that parish. But he was a very kind, gentle man who you learn from more by example than anything else. But he was always very inquisitive, asking you about your life and what your plans were. And I think he was probably one of the ones that got me going.
And so it was pretty natural that since you lived in the same town and since your father went to St. Anselm's, that you would go on down the road, or, well, if the farm was owned by them. And so that was never in question. You were going to go there.
That's an absolutely correct statement, and you've phrased it quite well, Dick. Although I must say that it wasn't always without question to yours truly. When the time came for me to look at going to college from high school, I had a friend of mine who was very interested in Boston College, and in fact he had an overnight stay arranged with a football game and some meals and so on, and invited me to join him, so I did. And in fact, that weekend the Boston College Eagles played Navy. Oh. And I got to see a very early shot of somebody who became quite famous, not only in college ranks, but in the pro ranks later on, Roger Staubach. Yes. Needless to say, Navy won the game rather handily, as I recall. Anyway, I came back from that weekend and immediately informed my folks that Boston College is where I was going to college. And I guess they thought that maybe that would pass, and they sort of let it go for several months. But when I persisted, my father sat me down one day and said, you and I need to have a talk. And he explained to me that St. Anselm's is where I was going to college, and for a very practical reason. When my father accepted employment at the college, and he had had a long history with the college beyond just being a student. But when he returned to begin their alumni relations program, part of the compensation was in-kind compensation, which consisted of free tuition for all of his children. So, in essence, he was providing for us in a very good way. I realized later, but at the time it was not my first choice. Yes, let me put it that way.
Well, Al, you did extremely well at St. Anselm's, and you majored in biology.
Did.
And at that time, was there anything giving you inclinations toward the profession of dentistry?
Yes, actually, before that, before I went to college, at that time it was very common to try to identify your path in college even before you got there.
Totally different than from nowadays.
Yeah, absolutely. That changed probably a decade or so later. Yeah. But at that time, people were trying to find out what is it you wanted to do with your life. And I think we were often challenged by the Christian Brothers in high school. I went to Bishop Bradley High School in Manchester. And I don't recall too many of the specifics, but we had some testing that was done, I believe, in my sophomore or junior year. Can't remember which. And I was told that I had talent with fine motor skills, and so we began to explore what careers would be. And even though I had no experience using those fine motor skills that supposedly I had, dentistry was one of the careers that I was encouraged to look at. I had regular dental visits with Charlie Burke, who was my dentist for years and years in Manchester, and had always been treated well by him and appreciated what he did for me, and I expected for others as well, that I considered it, and when I went to college, I started off in pre-dent.
The idea of dentistry early on is kind of unique to some of the interviews that we do. They're not quite sure they know the academics portions of it. Now, when you were in the college, you have then had the opportunity to see if your fine motor skills worked as you did the testing for dental school. I know you went to the University of Pennsylvania. Did the school push you down there? How did you get to Philadelphia?
Interesting question, Dick. As I mentioned earlier, I think I was one of the few that had wanderlust. I had wanted to go to Boston to college, and I think I was sort of chomping at the bit to get out and sort of fly on my own from the family nest. And so I looked at primarily three schools. I looked at Tufts, I looked at Columbia, and I looked at the University of Pennsylvania. I was really not terribly interested in Tufts, or I shouldn't say I wasn't interested, but not as interested as I was in the other two schools because it was so close to my home. I was dating the woman who would eventually become my wife, Joan, at the time, and Joan lived in Stamford, which is just outside of New York City, Stamford, Connecticut, and so there was some attraction in New York City. And I had another professor who taught comparative biology, comparative anatomy when I was in college, Barbara Stahl. Interestingly enough, Barbara's husband is a dentist, and she knew several of the faculty members at Columbia, and both of the Stahls felt that one's education was not complete unless one spent at least some time in New York City. And so they were very much encouraging me to go to Columbia. I did have another friend of the family, Jack McNeil, who graduated from University of Pennsylvania, also was a graduate of St. Anselm's, very good friend of the family and active in the Alumni Association, and he recommended Penn. At that time, Penn had a very strong reputation in clinical dentistry. The situation at Columbia had a clinic that was much older. I did visit the school, and I actually very much enjoyed the interview I had at Columbia. I remember it had somewhat of a surprise involved in it. They rotated us among 3 or 4 faculty members, and we had individual discussion with each of them. And in the third or fourth interview, the gentleman who was interviewing me reached into his desk and he pulled out what turned out to be a handpiece and laid it on the table and began to dismantle it, all the while talking in a very disarming manner to me. And when he finished dismantling it, he suddenly stopped talking and he looked at me and he said, "Okay, now I'd like you to put that back together." And fortunately, I had been watching him, and so I was able to put it back together. And so that part of the experience was much better than it might otherwise have been if I hadn't been paying particular attention. But in the end, I think because of the clinical situation, and perhaps because it was even further from home than New York City, I chose Philadelphia to go to dental school.
Well, now, what about the girl from Connecticut? What did she think about this thing? She thought that was all right?
Well, she didn't take it as a personal affront. She would have preferred, I think, that I be closer, but we did maintain contact with one another and actually got married after my sophomore year at Penn. And of course, that was very common. I think 30 to 40% of my class was actually married when they began dental school.
Yes.
So it was very common back then.
Similar in our class. We'll go into the family a little bit. The days of dental school are certainly interpreted differently by different people. Many can go to the one degree of it was really an ugly affair. Some of them go and say, this was magnificent. Where you fit into that scale? One end, or was dental school a good time for you?
I think, as in most things, I tend to be a moderate, and I think my experience was somewhere in between. I certainly had those experiences that I think are reflected in the comments you hear from people it was a terrible experience. I'd never want to go back. I was treated meanly and almost in subhuman fashion. And yet you have the other end of the spectrum, which you've already described, where people think that it was just an absolutely ecstatic experience. I think mine was somewhere in between. I experienced difficult professors, and I experienced some wonderful ones who helped me a great deal. But I think that's pretty much analogous to life. You run across those kinds of people in all walks of life, and it's probably good preparation. Surprisingly enough, I struggled a little bit in the beginning of dental school. Those fine motor skills that tested out in those tests back in high school were there, but connecting them to the conceptualization that needs to go on in the brain actually took me a little while. And I can actually express appreciation to one of my classmates in particular, who wasn't even a member of my dental fraternity, but a member of another one, who sort of took me under his wing for a couple of nights and helped me capture that essence of removing a tooth from that block of wax. And once you capture it, it never leaves you. Yeah. But it was a bit difficult for me to catch in the first place.
Of the instructors you had, were any of those particularly memorable? Could you call them mentors? Would you call them very influential in your thought patterns of where you would go following your DMD degree at Penn?
There were a couple that I would mention. D. Walter Cohen, who eventually became dean, but was head of the perio department at Penn at the time that I was there, was just beginning to unravel for dental students and explain the history of periodontal disease as an infectious disease process. And that training at Penn, I think, stood me in good stead when I got out afterwards, perhaps even a step ahead of people that went to other institutions. So he, I think, was definitely an influence on me. And an instructor by the name of Warren Doherty, who was a very pragmatic prosthodontics instructor. And he, in fact, I painted his house for him one summer, not by myself, but with 3 or 4 other students. It was a gabled house out in western Pennsylvania. And I never felt quite the same about house painting after that job. I think it took us most of the summer. Yes, yeah, yeah. Okay. Good grade on the house painting, yes, yes. But he was very, very practical. There were others. One in particular that I'd like to mention was a part-time instructor. His name was Rulon Dempster. And he's actually the one that helped me find out about the Indian Health Service in particular. I was interested in Indian health from some reading that I had done. And he volunteered to find out some contacts for me, because the recruiter who came to the dental school was from the Coast Guard. And as you know, all of the dental officers in the Coast Guard are actually PHS dental officers, but he wasn't that familiar with the Indian Health Service. So Dr. Dempster helped me in that regard. And he also, I think, awakened me a bit to public health, maybe for the first time. There was a clinic called Special Patients Clinic that was located kind of tucked away on the first floor down below the main clinic floor. It was run by Dr. Manny Album, who's very well known for treatment of children, particularly children that have disabilities of one type or another. And Rulon said to me, why don't you consider coming down to Special Patients Clinic? Well, of course, you didn't get credit for any of those things that you did in Special Patients Clinic, which is one of the reasons students didn't exactly flock down there. But I decided to take him up on it, and actually spent time off and on in that clinic during the rest of my 2 years at Penn. Enjoyed it very much, and found out that that's a very different kind of practice that has its own kind of reward as well.
Okay, so now you're graduating from Penn with a DMD, and you have some inclinations toward the Indian Health Service, but you took an internship. Start that sequence through when you took your internship, and then working it on through the residency, through the Johns Hopkins experience, and how then you sort of channeled and focused your public health service career in the Indian Health Service area.
Okay. You're prepared to listen for a while.
Yes,
now.
And that was why I worded the question that way.
Actually, my interest in the internship, in addition to my interest in Indian health, was to refine and expand my practice skills. I had taken the licensure exam, the New England board, Northeast Regional Board, and gotten licenses in New Hampshire and in Massachusetts. And my plan at the time was to go back to New Hampshire and set up a practice somewhere in the middle of the state. And at that point in time, there were very few specialists in the state, particularly oral surgeons. And I thought that getting some hospital experience, particularly that offered by an internship, would be very valuable in that regard, so that you didn't have to refer your patients to Boston or large metropolitan areas. So my wife and I packed up our little automobile, and as I recall, only 3 out of the 4 cylinders were running at the time, and drove it out to Gallup, New Mexico, well above sea level, and actually had to get rid of that car shortly after we got there because it didn't breathe very well in the rarefied air. Had a wonderful internship experience. Most of it very clinical, a lot of trauma. Unfortunately, at that time, it was not uncommon in Gallup, which is where the hospital was located, as a border town. It borders the Navajo Reservation, and it was quite common for there to be a considerable amount of trauma on weekends that showed up in the emergency room, and all of the fractured jaws ended up under the dental service. And so we had a very good relationship with the ENT department, and I got experience that I still believe probably be hard to gain anywhere else than I got in that year. At the end of that year, I still needed to do a couple more years to fulfill my draft obligation in the Commissioned Corps of the Public Health Service. And so, enjoying the services I did, I decided to spend at least that additional couple years, and I was stationed up on the Turtle Mountain Chippewa Indian Reservation up on the Canadian border in North Dakota for a couple of years. I won't say that I loved the weather, but it was an experience, and one that I remember perhaps with more fondness than not. It was my first introduction to being able to work with and run an expanded functions dental clinic. And I also began to get some concept of what it was to try to run a community program. The Indian Health Service at that time was very much focused on productivity and producing a lot of services using those expanded functions clinics, and had been involved in studies that showed that you could do that and do it quite well. So that was fascinating, but you also realized that there were many people that you were not reaching that showed up for emergency care, but you couldn't get them back in, particularly adults, because at that time we were focused on children. So as I neared the end of my 2 years in North Dakota, and I was debating whether to leave the service and go back to New England to open up my own practice, I was invited to participate in a course in Desert Willow, Arizona. Desert Willow is actually located in Tucson. It was a government training center that the Indian Health Service had established, and Dick Baker, who was one of the regional dentists at the time, had designed the program. And he had a number of fascinating faculty members. Amongst them was Wesley Young, who was one of the fathers, at least in my mind, of dental public health. And they gave us a stack of material. One book I recall, I still think I have it in my library somewhere at home, about this thick, containing a fascinating array of papers that focused on community dentistry. And I went to that course, lasted a week. We were expected to think and analyze and debate with people who were much further along in the concepts of public health, but nonetheless appreciated the everyday experience that we ourselves shared, and the unique opportunity that we had to apply public health in that setting. That really made the difference for me in terms of staying. That combined with the fact that Bob Mecklenburg, who was later to also become a chief dental officer of the Public Health Service, and clearly one of my mentors and friend to this day, had just taken over as chief of the Indian Health Service program. And Bob had initiated a number of programs to try to increase the retention rate. Turnover of dentists was extremely high. People were coming in for 2 years and leaving, and there was very little experience base in the program. And he developed a series of career ladders, assignment preference forms. So combined with a budding interest in public health and the opportunity to look and see, if I want to stay in this program, what is it that I can expect to have as opportunities 2 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 or 15 years from now. And so I saw the opportunity to work in training programs as something that I would be interested in. So I accepted an assignment to Browning, Montana, up on the Blackfeet Indian Reservation. That was supposed to be a 2-year assignment. I was there about 3 months, and I was encouraged to apply for an education residency in Phoenix. And I expressed some concern, saying that I had just gotten to Montana. I had just discovered what it was like to have a season pass to a ski area. My skiing career started late in New Hampshire, and I was enjoying Montana. But I was told that it usually took a couple of years to get these programs once you applied for them. Well, I guess you can guess what happened. Given that prelude, I was accepted to the program, left Montana after a year. And in fact, when I got into the program in Phoenix, which was a 2-year program, I stayed only a year, because about halfway through that program, the residency director, John Butts, came to me and said, you know, I've been looking at your resume a little more closely, and really most of the clinical things that are half of this residency, you did when you were in Gallup. And
as an interim.
And I think that you probably should consider leaving the program early, because you will have accomplished what we have to offer you here. So I agreed, and I accepted an assignment in Lawrence, Kansas at the Haskell Indian Junior College as deputy of the program. At that time, the Indian Health Service ran a dental assistant training program at Haskell that trained young Native American women to be those expanded functions assistants that I talked about earlier. It was an assignment that I looked forward to greatly. However, it wasn't one that actually came to pass. About 6 weeks before I was scheduled to go to Kansas, the area director, Dr. Butts, who I mentioned a moment ago, came to me in the hospital clinic in Phoenix. And I still remember him walking in and saying to me, as I was gloved and about ready to start a periodontal surgery case, can we speak for a few moments? And I remember saying, right now? And he said, yes, right now. So we went downstairs and had a cup of coffee, and he explained to me how he'd like me to consider taking a new assignment in Sacramento, California, a strictly administrative assignment in charge of all the dental programs in California. And my first question, halfway between a question and a statement, I guess, was, I didn't know we had Indians in California, which showed the fact that I was still somewhat naivete, but also the fact that California was not really in the mainstream of Indian Health Service. There were no Indian health facilities in California. There had been at one time, but the federal services had been discontinued in the late 60s and had just recently been restored, and they were looking for someone to coordinate contract programs that had some Indian Health Service money, were run directly by tribes, but also used billing of Medicaid in order to add resources to their programs and expand services. So I accepted that assignment, called the moving company and said, can you get me a truck going west instead of east? And we were on our way across the desert to Sacramento.
You had a heck of a time keeping the job, didn't you?
I had 6 assignments in 7 years, so that was often the story. Sacramento was a great experience. I learned a lot about administration. I learned that I needed to learn a lot more before I could become good at it, or at least better than I was. And at the end of 2 years, I accepted an offer from Bob Mecklenburg to come back and be his assistant in Rockville. Part of the enticement was that I would be able to go back and do my master's of public health, probably at Hopkins in the local area. So I did accept that, knowing that I had now formally changed my career path from either specialization or dental assistant training into the administrative track. But now I knew that I liked administration. Kind of an interesting interlude, if I might at the moment, is that one of the things that appealed to me about dentistry was that I thought I could have something that gave me not only an opportunity to help people, but something that had reasonably regular hours. And one of the things that I had always found frustrating as a kid growing up is that my father spent most of his career in administration, and often missed supper, would come home late in the evening, and I thought, gee, that was something that I'd rather not create in my life. So interestingly enough, as my wife often reminds me, I've pretty much ended up in the same sort of career as my dad did, but did have that opportunity after a year to go back to Johns Hopkins, get my Master of Public Health. Again, meet some fascinating professors and people from all over the world, especially in international health, and realized that so much of what we were doing in Indian Health Service in the U.S. is not dissimilar from what goes on in other countries in public health programs. So it was nice to compare notes and to be able to feel that one was sharing information that might be helpful to others as well as receiving it. So that's sort of how I got as far as my formal public health training. I completed it.
And you're certified in public health?
Did my residency
Hopkins,
in dental public health as part of the Indian Health Service.
Yes.
Those were accredited dental public health residencies. And then a couple of years later, took and passed my boards in dental public health, and have been a diplomate of the board since then. In fact, I'm currently an examining member of the board.
Your first question is, if you haven't moved 6 times in 7 years, we don't look at?
No.
Let's jump out of that area just a minute and talk about family. You met your wife as a freshman in dental school, and you got married in your sophomore year. How did that go through? And the family then? Tell me what's happening with that right now.
Well, we met in college. She was actually a nursing student. At that time, St. Anselm's was an all-male college except for the nursing program and for what we used to call faculty brats. I was a faculty brat because my father was in the administration of the college, and my sister was one of the few females that was at the college in addition to the nursing students. Joan was actually dating somebody else the first couple of years in college, but we got together after that and actually dated our last 2 years in college, and then, as I mentioned, got married in dental school. We've got 2 children, which I think was where you were going with the question.
Sure, that's next.
Our daughter Sarah is a kindergarten teacher at a parochial school in the area. She's 30 and will be getting married next year. And our son Patrick is 25. He's a graduate of Elon College down in North Carolina.
Burlington area.
And that's right.
Sure,
Burlington area. And Sarah, incidentally, our daughter, went to St. Vincent College, which is in Latrobe, Pennsylvania. Most famous, I guess, as the home of Arnold Palmer and Rolling Rock beer.
I didn't know about the Rolling Rock beer.
Well, most people say the beer first and Arnold Palmer second, but if you're a golfer, I guess you'd say Arnold Palmer. The interesting part of that story, Dick, is that St. Vincent is actually the first Benedictine college in the United States, and is actually the grandparent of St. Anselm, where Joan and I went to college. So I guess we've kind of continued that loop of the Benedictine family. Patrick majored in journalism, and he is working for a publication called Carolina Blue, which covers all of University of North Carolina Chapel Hill sports, and he's currently assistant editor of the paper. And although I obviously have an extreme bias, he's a heck of a better writer than his old man was at that stage of development.
And now is the important time of the year for him with the big tournaments coming up. And I'm sure he's a busy.
That's right. That's right. I wish the Tar Heels were doing better, but in the tournament,
they need some help. They're certainly. Now let's sort of jump back a little bit into your career before we get into some issues. Especially, I want you to give us your concerns on the public health service as it relates to the Indian Health Service, because I think you were probably one of the first, you and Bob were some of the first to actually give it the impetus it needed to in the public health area. And I think you have probably some comments about that. You've received many awards, all well-deserved, and I know you've received one as an outstanding alumnus from your school, St. Anselm's, and from the University of Pennsylvania, and many awards through the Public Health Service, presidential awards, and all those commendation and outstanding achievement medals. Any of those stand out in your mind? They're all certainly worthy awards, but I thought maybe there's a couple that you'd like to comment on that are more meaningful than others.
Without demeaning any of them, because they're all wonderful awards, and I appreciate all of them. I think that the one I received, the Surgeon General's Award from C. Everett Koop, was special because of the great admiration that I had for the man and a lot of what he did for the Public Health Service Commission Corps and his leadership role, as well as for the people of the U.S. The second one I think I'd mention is one that caught me completely by surprise, and I'm one who often enjoyed giving awards that were surprises to other people. That was the President's Award of the American Association of Public Health Dentistry. And it was a bit unusual on a couple of counts. One, I received it when I was president-elect of the association, which is fairly unusual in and of itself. But I also received that from the current president, because it is the president's award to give, Dennis Leverett. And Dennis, unfortunately, was deceased at the time I got the award. Dennis was a great leader in public health. He was head of the Eastman Dental Center in Rochester for many years and the editor of the Journal of Public Health Dentistry, and somebody that I was looking forward to shadowing as I moved into my officership in the AA-PhD. Unfortunately, Dennis became very ill, terminally ill, in fact, with cancer during my president-elect year. And in essence, I became president for that year as well as my presidency year in my own right. But I had many conversations with Dennis, and I learned a lot from him, and I learned a lot from him in terms of how to deal with perhaps the most difficult situation that any of us will have to face, and he did it with grace and good cheer and professionalism. And so getting that award from him, which he had asked someone else to present on his behalf, was very, very special.
And you received so many awards through the uniformed services of the Public Health Service. I mean, military, as a Navy guy, of course, you know, we call them military awards, but they're awards through your service obligation achievement for outstanding contributions in each of your tours. You had so many tours in the Public Health Service. Primarily, 99% of them were Indian Health Service.
That's correct.
Up until you worked into being the chief of the service. And of course, you achieved that through a 2-star flag rank, which is the highest rank that you can receive in military public health as a dentist. Give me your thoughts on the progression of the public health within the Indian Health Service for the past 10 years, and where you think that's going.
Public health within the Indian Health Service?
Within the Indian Health Service, yeah.
Public health service, Dick, or public health as a concept?
As a concept, because I'm
okay.
concerned about the kids were your main impetus for a long time.
It's a good question, and one that I hope in the end will have a happy answer, but I think we'll have to wait and see. Indian health was in disarray. That's Indian Health, small letters, not the agency. Before the actual creation of the division in Indian Health in the 1950s. Most of the health services before that time were operated by the Bureau of Indian Affairs in the Department of the Interior, and they were somewhat helter-skelter, or at least not terribly well coordinated, although there were public health service officers that had been detailed at that time. Most people would say there were 3 phases after the creation of what was called the Division of Indian Health within the old HEW, Health Education and Welfare Department, what's now Health and Human Services. In 1955, when that was created, it was really a phase during the first half a dozen years of getting organized, doing surveys, finding out what the problems were, trying to get funds to replace facilities that were either non-existent or in many cases, badly in disrepair. Then there was another period that probably ran for about a decade of getting basic services in place and operating those facilities. After that point in time, somewhere in the 70s began a 3rd phase of gradual transition because of community maturity and development of legislation that was passed by Congress that allowed Indian tribes to take over their programs. If I can just focus on the dental portion of that, perhaps as a microcosm of the problem overall, a lot of progress was made, general medical services, by improving water supply and sanitation, and part of that brought with it the opportunity to fluoridate small water supplies. The period of the 70s in the dental program was one that, as I mentioned earlier, focused an awful lot, 60s and 70s, really on productivity. In fact, I think we used to feel that we could fill our way to success with dental fillings in the Indian Health Service. If we just had enough person power to do it, we could get all those teeth filled and we could get people on maintenance programs. Perhaps that was possible, but it would have been very expensive in retrospect, and those resources never came. And around about 1980, we took a serious look. It was about the time that I had just come on board with Dr. Mecklenburg as his assistant in headquarters. And we realized that some of the things that we had going in prevention really existed on paper rather than in reality. We had a fluoridation policy, for example, but we didn't really have fluoridation. We had fluoridators installed, but many of them were broken and weren't working. Many of them were working but didn't have any chemical to put in them. If you went out and tested the water, there was no optimal level of fluoride in those systems. So we made a commitment at that time, which was about the time the department was working on the beginnings of Healthy People objectives, and we committed to improving our fluoridation program, and we committed to doing sealants. And in fact, we're successful over the ensuing decade on both of those accounts. As near as I can tell, Indian Health as a community is one of the few that actually met the dental sealant objective for 1990 and met it a little bit early. We had somewhat less success with fluoridation, but dramatically improved over where we had been. And we did that through a combination of methods. We made sure that the expertise was there, and we made sure that the resources were there, and we did what I think were some creative things in terms of allocation of resources. If you had a program that worked, we bumped your allocation up a little bit, and there were some howls about that in the beginning, but if you looked at the numbers, it actually made a difference. As we got into the 90s, the pent-up demand for adult care, and we had moved into adult care. In the late 1970s, the dental program largely said we can't continue to ignore the adult population. So we went to something called family-oriented care. But as you might imagine, if you don't have a great expansion of resources, giving care to adults had to come from somewhere, and fewer children were seen. So at that point in time, we developed what's called the Schedule of Services. And it was really a scheme for rationing care based on public health principles. Everybody has to have access to emergency care. Preventive services and restorative services are primary and considered basic services. Above that, you have to have an awful good reason to be doing crowns or crown and bridge or dentures and the like. That began to allow us to make some substantial inroads, still twice the level of disease and twice the level of unmet need, but comparing the Indian population in a survey that was done in the early 1990s to one that was done in 1984, we had made substantial inroads in both the children and the adult population. But as you can imagine, as newer legislation was passed allowing tribes even more freedom to take over programs, resources were actually becoming constricted rather than expanding. So as I often say, even the government has some economy of scale. And as you take overhead away and distribute it out into smaller programs, you create situations where some tribes may have more resources than others. And that became a very difficult problem for the Indian Health Service to deal with. And as some tribes took over programs, they responded to that pent-up demand from adults who wanted care for themselves, or they wanted orthodontic care for their children that were teenagers. Not unrealistic expectations. They're expectations that every family at least aspires to in this country. And so as they responded to that, there were lower proportions of children seen. And I'm not as up on the statistics there as I was at one time, but I think there's been some slippage. But I tend to be a hopeful person, and I think that as communities evaluate their programs over time, public health principles will come back to the fore, and that they'll do what's right for the communities, even in cases where it requires them to make some difficult decisions. And I think the value of public health will come to the fore again.
Let's now start at an issue which I know that's of interest to you, and that's access of care. And you've done some manpower studies through the Public Health Service. I know you've done extensive work. You talk about it to the Johns Hopkins people. Give me your comments of where we stand right now, nationally maybe, and because I know that was a field that you were in heavily.
Access to care, of course, is a primary interest all of us in public health, and really should be to the population at large. I think everyone likes to think that in times of necessity you can get whatever care you need. In this country we have a healthcare system. Some people would argue that it's not really a system, it's just a collection of services. But we do have a fail-safe system for most people in terms of medical care, and that's the emergency room. It's a very expensive place to provide care, but as a last resort, it's available for people. I'm not arguing that this is a good place for people to get their care. In fact, it's not. They should be getting some level of primary care. In terms of access to dental services, however, it's pretty hard to my knowledge, to get definitive treatment of a dental problem in an emergency room. You heard me mention earlier that I have a brother who's an emergency room physician, and he and I have had several conversations over the years about the difficulties of trying to deal with people who are in pain, maybe have some degree of infection. You can certainly give them pain medication, you can certainly put them on antibiotics, but as you and I both know, that may take care of the situation for a while, but without definitive treatment, it's going to come back nearly all of the time. So we need to have a system that helps those people that don't have access to care obtain it. It's a difficult issue. Access, of course, has been increasing as slowly dental insurance has become more prevalent in the country. And if you look at statistics across those who have no dental insurance with those who have the greatest level of coverage, no matter what the age grouping is you look at, the utilization of care is higher. Ironically enough, the people that have that coverage, usually because they're employed, are also better educated, have better preventive habits, and one could argue probably need access to those services somewhat less than those who are most in need. So it becomes a matter of how best to deal with people when your lack of access is due to not just financial barriers, because sometimes you can create access and financial access, and utilization does improve, but it doesn't improve to the degree that one might expect. There are education, there are child care issues, there are language barriers, there are ethnic differences. As the great melting pot that this country is, we have to find ways to deal with all of those. I'm not sure that I or any other public health dentist has the definitive answer in a country such as the U.S. It may be different in other countries where socialized medicine, in the generic sense, is an acceptable way of delivering health care. That seems to be anathema to the majority of the population in this country, and in the U.S., for very good reasons, is built on individualism, rugged individualism, and the opportunity to do well as an individual. Even though only 1 in 5 or 1 in 10 may actually make it, it's that opportunity that people seem to value. So the challenge to public health is how to create access. I mentioned in the Indian Health Service, we try to do it with this schedule of services. Back in the early 90s, when I was Chief Dental Officer, we tried to create a package of services within the Clinton healthcare reform legislation, and in fact, it got incorporated not into just President Clinton's package, but those that were submitted by other congressmen as well. And again, it offered that public health principle of emergency care, prevention, and basic services. We had many people in the administration say to us, we can't provide dental care, it's too expensive. But if you're looking at services that are in those 3 areas, they're not really that expensive. And if you limit care to that, you can do a lot to raise the oral health level of the entire population without spending a lot of money. And I could probably make an argument, although I don't have all the data I need to sustain it, that taking care of these people on an emergency basis in emergency rooms is certainly not a good use of services. I think the fact that we've had access to care as one of the objectives in the Healthy People objectives, the original ones in 1990, 2000, 2010, and because dentistry has been part of those, or oral health has been part of those, it's helped us to maintain a focus, and it's linked back to what many communities see as a necessary service. It's ironic that sometimes the administrators or even the physicians, in part because they don't understand dentistry, it's a separate educational service, don't see it as that important. But my experience in Indian Health Service and in community health centers in the public health service are that communities really do value those services, and yet they're not always as accessible as they should be. It may be that we need to look at a mix of creative solutions. I think we could probably do more with school-related programs or school-linked programs. I don't know whether they would have to actually be on site, or if they were on site, whether they would have to be at all schools. We might try to target certain schools where we know that the population of children attending that school has lower utilization of dental care. And for those who are in other schools, maybe in higher socioeconomic areas, but are in difficult circumstances themselves, they could have the opportunity for their parents to bring them to these other schools. Again, largely focusing on preventive services, because we know if children get preventive care, if they get dental sealants, a lot of the disease prevalence that we've seen in the past just won't come to pass for those children.
Let's look at, since you are and have been with the International and American Association of Dental Research for several years, and since you're now the interim executive director, give me an idea of where research in the U.S. dental schools is sitting right now. I know that there's a pocketbook issue of trying to keep money into the dental schools, but what's your opinion of that going on right at this moment?
Well, like the answer to so many questions, one could say in a one-word answer, it depends on, in this case, the institution that you're talking about. Research is alive and well in a lot of the dental schools in the U.S. If one looks at the allocation of dollars that come from the National Institute of Dental and Craniofacial Research at the National Institutes of Health, there are 10 to 20 schools of the 56 schools in the U.S. that get the vast majority of the funding and have very active research staffs. It's a matter of trying to integrate research, education, and services. I mentioned earlier, Dick, that I went to the University of Pennsylvania in part because it had a reputation as a very strong clinical program. If one wanted to be a clinical dentist, that's the sort of school that you would want to go to. Now, I hasten to add that, at least in the last decade, Penn has also risen quite high in those schools that are doing a lot of research and getting money from NIH. And I guess that's a way of saying it's not impossible to combine these missions. And I think that's what schools need to do. It's not an easy mission because you need someone who's well-versed in research, has a research program that either is ongoing or can be launched, can attract other researchers to an institution in order to make sure that you've got a viable program that will continue and will continue to attract research dollars to that particular institution. The larger problem is in looking at how dentistry itself looks at research. We know that associations like mine and the American Dental Association, and I think most of our other formal dental associations, value research. But I'm not sure that it's always been inculcated into faculty and students within the school. And if you think back to, I can think back to my days, I'm sure you probably had similar experience when you are in dental school. Most dental schools, not all, you have a 2-year period where you are engaged in basic sciences, some preclinical things, and then you're launched into your clinical career. Been chomping at the bit, waiting to get there, the beginning of your 3rd year. And sooner or later, you have an instructor who will say to you on the clinic floor, all right, now we're about to launch your real career in dentistry. We're going to teach you what dentistry is really all about. And you're very susceptible to this. And that's not necessarily bad. You do need to learn about clinical dentistry and about management of services. But somehow it becomes a matter of doing things rather than thinking about things. Charles Bertolami, who's our current president of the American Association for Dental Research and the dean at the University of California, San Francisco, which does have a large research portion to its school's portfolio, is fond of saying that not everyone can be a researcher, but everyone who graduates from a dental school should be a man or woman of science and be able to do critical thinking. I'm not sure how best to solve the problem, but it has always seemed to me that I would have benefited as a student if sometime in my first 2 years, instead of being always in that preclinical lab or hitting the basic science books, I could have been a younger member of, or junior member, if you will, of a team that was treating patients and problem solving. And that team would consist of at least one faculty member, but probably a couple, as well as students, perhaps from each level of class. And it may be that problem-oriented learning is beginning to get at the root of this. But it seems to me that if you have an opportunity to begin to apply what you're learning in basic science to the clinic, and the person that's ahead of you is emulating that same model, and he or she, and eventually you, become the head of that team, you begin to pass it on back down to the earlier students. And it would not be that hard to introduce relatively simple research projects. We have some of that going on in schools now. In fact, the AADR, the American Association for Dental Research, has a national student research group, and it's composed of students who are members of our organization. Usually they're members of the American Student Dental Association as well, who do research projects. Unfortunately, there's a tendency for participation in those projects to be driven more by a desire to position oneself better for specialty training program applications and acceptance into those programs, rather than something that's the right thing to do and that is definitely related to practice. And this could go from areas such as oral medicine and oral surgery to dental materials testing and radiology. I have to admit that I come relatively late to the research field, not so much in terms of when I came with the International Association for Dental Research, but even when I was getting into the Indian Health Service, it was a while before I realized the potential that research offered for our services program. And unfortunately, how little research was valued. In academia, you obviously get kudos. In fact, for tenure, it's often expected that you're going to have X number of publications. Right. If you work in federal services, now I can't speak for the military services, but in the public health service, except in rather unique assignments, if you're in a services program, publishing is fine as long as it doesn't get in the way of providing the services. And so some reorientation in service programs as well as in academic institutions, I think would go a long way to making sure that the Institute of Medicine report back in 1995, which in many ways just echoes the Guy's report from back in the 1920s, that says we need more integration of basic sciences and the clinical sciences. They're not Mars and Venus. They really are part and parcel of the same package of thinking that's appropriate to dental care delivery for patients.
Let me change venue just a little bit here. Two kids in high school knock on your front door, and they know that you're a dentist, and they knock on the front door and they say, Dr. Collins, we're thinking about dentistry. What do you tell them?
I'd tell them to continue to explore that. Certainly based on my experience, it's been a fascinating ride. I could not imagine having had a better experience than I've had in the years since I graduated from dental school in 1971. The path has been a lot different than the one that I would have expected. And so I challenge those two knocking on my door to make sure that they realize all of the opportunities that are out there. I think those opportunities exist. I hope that increasingly members of the dental profession will be able to paint that broader picture to those coming along who are anticipating possibly doing a career in dentistry. I do have concerns. I think that if dentistry continues in the mechanistic vein. And we still hear, not so much from members of the profession, but perhaps perceptions of the profession from people outside the drill fill or drill fill and bill aspect of the profession. I think that we would we really need in the future to move towards a larger view, perhaps as dentistry as part of medicine. It's somewhat unusual that dentistry actually ended up on a completely separate track from medicine, because as those of us in dental public health are fond of saying, the mouth is part of the body.
Used to be.
And a very valuable part. Hopefully what we're doing here will reflect that and support that concept. It's part of the face that we put forward to people, and I think deserves recognition by the profession of medicine. Now, that doesn't mean that we necessarily have to be incorporated fully into medicine. We don't have to have the dental school subsumed into medical school, but we might consider having those two students, when they go to their next level beyond college, go into an institution that provides a broad level of education in the health professions. Let them see at the end of that 2 years, after exposure to dentistry, to other specialties of medicine, whether that's the direction in which they'd like to go. When they get there, I think they not only will have more confidence in the decision that they've made, but they will have matriculated with others who are going off into other aspects of the medical profession, and they'll be able to make those cross connections that are so vitally important and becoming more so in today's practice, where you have patients who are on multiple medications, who are much older than the average patient used to be 30 or 40 years ago in a dental practice, and require a practitioner that's quite knowledgeable about general medical conditions and not just about teeth.
So you're fairly optimistic about where we're going with maybe some alterations. What do you personally, you're a young guy yet, you got a lot of time yet, do you have any aspirations that you're still looking at that you can expound on? I mean,
personal aspirations?
Yeah, what do you want to do yet? You got 25, 30 years yet to fool around.
I don't know if I've got that much time, but well, we certainly can be optimistic.
Yeah.
And make some assumptions that whatever amount of time we have left, we want to use it so that it's of value to ourselves as well as to our fellow citizens of the planet. I've been a clinical dentist and a public health dentist, had a great career in the public health service. I've now been with the Associations for Dental Research for I'll be 8 years this May. I've got a couple more years that I've promised to stay on with the associations. I haven't completely decided what I'm going to do at the end of that time, but I do anticipate that I'd like to do something closer to my roots in public health. Quite frankly, even though I still deal with issues of public health and a variety of fascinating issues in regard to the research community, and this really has been a wonderful opportunity for me to learn about those issues and to work with people in the research field. The vast majority of what I do is pure administration, and I'd like to get back more into the public health arena. I have two thoughts in that regard. One is, particularly with the crisis in the dental schools and the need for dental faculty, there may be an opportunity for somebody who's fairly far along in his career, but hopefully has some limited degree of expertise to offer, to become a faculty member, community dentistry department. I have had limited opportunities to do that over the years with students at the University of Michigan, at the University of Maryland, Georgetown when it was open, other places, and I've always enjoyed that. So that, I think, is something that I might be interested in doing. The other part is something that I got probably from a combination of my days in Indian Health Service, as well as having a wonderful father-in-law who unfortunately died a few years ago. Was an anesthesiologist. In fact, one of the first in that field to actually specialize, set up the first anesthesia practice in Stamford, Connecticut. He retired when he was very late 60s, almost 70, and for the next 10 years did volunteer medical missions work overseas, and had some fascinating experiences, and I think did a lot of good. He not only functioned as an anesthesiologist, but he was a teacher as well, and there are hopefully still a lot of nurse anesthetists out there carrying on and helping people because of what he did. I don't know whether, because of personal circumstances, I'm going to be able to go overseas to do those things, but if the opportunity presents itself, I certainly would have to look at it seriously. And closer to home, there's plenty of opportunities to assist in public health, and I'm really looking forward to, as I said, getting back closer to my roots, and maybe going back to the clinical level will close the circle and allow me to apply a lot of those skills that I've learned over the years back where the people come in the door to get their care.
Well, whatever you do, we know that you'll do it in a beautiful way because you have done it that way throughout your career. Now, I'm going to give you I'll give you one option to respond to the question: what legacy do you want to be remembered for? Somebody says in 10 years, they say, "Oh, you remember old Skip Collins." What do you remember him for? What do you want them to remember you for?
I'd like them to, I think, remember me as a person who took what I think are average skills in most aspects and managed to achieve leadership roles in a number of programs, and did so with compassion and understanding and remembrance of his roots, and did them reasonably well. I hope that my legacy includes some recognition that, at least in a small way, I made some contributions to public health that, if we look at Indian health, for example, in our discussion earlier, may have eroded, but sometimes we need to take a step up and a step back before we can make two more steps upwards in terms of progress. And so if there's a level of optimism that that people take to their work because of an association with me, I guess that would be a fine legacy, and one that I'd certainly be more than satisfied with.
Well, again, this has been a real pleasure for me to sit here with you, to listen to your thoughts. You've contributed greatly. You certainly are a true leader in our dental profession. Those people that are around you understand that fully, and I thank you for the time this morning. I appreciate your friendship, Skip. Thank you for being here.
It's a pleasure. It's a great program. Thanks for letting me be part of it.
You're welcome.